33 murders.
They were looking for sensationalism, and they were looking for the monster.
29 bodies buried in one house.
Police found 29 bodies buried in shallow graves under Gacy's suburban Chicago home.
One of the highest number of homicides committed by one individual in American history.
This is the first time you're speaking publicly.
A clown for children's parties in the day, a scheming serial killer at night.
She said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
This is the story of John Wayne Gacy.
There were red flags all along the way.
Also known as the Killer Clown, who brutally assaulted and murdered more than 33 young males in Chicago, Illinois. But how did all of this happen? And how was the Killer Clown of Chicago finally apprehended and executed? To find out, make sure you watch this video till the end. Born in Chicago in March 1942, John Wayne Gacy had an extremely traumatic childhood. He was frequently abused by his severely alcoholic father, who was a mechanic and World War I veteran. John also suffered from poor physical health early on. Mental abuse from his father continued even when John was an adult, forcing him to relocate to Las Vegas temporarily. John Wayne Gacy committed his first heinous act when he was in his early 20s, shortly after he started working as a mortuary attendant. One evening, he climbed into one of the coffins in the embalming room and savored the cold touch of a dead teenage male. Shocked by his own actions, John returned home. But the fuse had already been lit inside. In 1964, John transferred to Springfield, Illinois, where he had a homosexual encounter with a colleague, even though John was engaged to his fiancée, Marlene Myers. Despite this, John and Marlene got married in September 1964 and moved to Waterloo. Marlene's father had bought 3 KFC franchises there, and John was expected to manage them. John made progress both financially and socially, and held parties in the basement of his house for the employees. Notably, he only interacted with the male staff, and often made sexual advances towards them after getting the young men drunk. The monster inside John Wayne Gacy had eaten his conscience, and a grim future awaited anyone who would cross paths with him. In Waterloo, John started to lead a double life. He would participate in fundraising events, but also partake in drugs, prostitution, and homosexuality, despite being married with children. Karma would get to him on December 3, 1968, when John was convicted of sodomy and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him and took custody of the children as well. In prison, John used his remarkable charisma and adaptability to clear his image, and was granted parole in 1970. He relocated to Chicago, seemingly reformed. However, his inner monster reared its ugly head again just a year later, and John was charged twice for sexual assault. Somehow, his parole officer did not learn about his misdemeanors, allowing John to go scot-free. In fact, he actually bought a ranch-style house shortly afterwards. That very place would become the House of Horrors for the next 7 years. John became an active contributor in his new neighborhood, garnering the trust of businessmen and politicians alike. He set up a profitable construction business named PDM Contractors. He also married a second time, but in 1975, admitted to his wife that he was bisexual. After coming out, John began to indulge in gross indecencies even more. Soon enough, his second wife confronted him about his long absences from the house, uninvited teenage boys in the garage, and stacks of gay pornography. In 1975, John's second wife also divorced him. However, his wife was too late to realize the deep, dark secrets John had been hiding from her. John had already been kidnapping, assaulting, and murdering young men since 1972. His first known murder was that of Timothy McCoy, when the unfortunate teenager was stabbed to death with a kitchen knife. John buried the body in his house and covered it with concrete. With nothing to lose, John Wayne Gacy was all set to write the darkest chapter in this history of crime the world had ever known. If you are enjoying this video so far, please drop a like and subscribe. John regularly used his affluent business and social standing to lure high school students and young men in his trap. He also devised the personas of Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown as part of his fundraising and parading activities, which helped shed any doubt that ever rose against him. He even managed to get a security clearance to meet First Lady Rosalind Carter, a testament to his camouflaging skills. Just like in Iowa, the staff for his company PDM contractors, was mostly made up of young men, which John intended to prey on once the opportunity arose. Since he lived alone after his divorce, John went on a relentless killing spree from 1975 to 1978. More than 30 young men fell to the claws of the killer clown, who had a tendency to incorporate his tricks into the way he tortured his victims. Serial killers are known to have trademark killing techniques, and John Wayne Gacy was no different. Most of his killings started off by either abducting the victim or luring them to his car or house, with a promise for partying or a job offer at PDM contractors. He would gain the trust of the victims through drugs and alcohol, after which he would handcuff them to show a magic trick. Then he would repeatedly torture and abuse the young men to his heart's content. His finishing touch was the rope trick, which made the victim choke to death. Most of the bodies were buried in the crawl space of his house, but by 1978, he had run out of space. Not all of his victims were meant to be murdered. Some, including Jeffrey Rignall, survived the ordeal and even approached the Chicago police. However, the gruesome details of their accounts were seldom believed by the police, and in those days, homosexuality was highly stigmatized. Even when John was arrested on charges, he would convince the police that all the activities were consensual, and he was not to blame. In later interviews, John claimed he didn't even remember his victims' faces. After filling his house with dead bodies, John resorted to throwing the bodies of the murdered youngsters into the Des Plaines River. One of these unfortunate souls was Robert Piest, a 15-year-old looking to get hired by John. Robert's family filed a missing persons report. The police already had John Wayne Gacy on their radar, and this time they meant to catch him in the act for good. The Des Plaines police obtained a search warrant for his home on December 13, 1978. Several items used in his grotesque torturing and abusive procedures were found. However, the evidence was still not conclusive, as Robert Piest had not been recovered. The police decided to keep John under surveillance. During the examination of his car, one of the sniffer dogs indicated that Robert may have been present in the vehicle. With growing evidence, the police searched his property further. At this point, John had become fed up with the constant monitoring and filed a civil suit against the police. However, in an astounding turn of events, John Wayne Gacy himself confessed to his crimes during one of the meetings with his lawyers. Heavily drunk, he spat out all the details of his horrific deeds. More than 30 murders, 29 dead bodies were buried in his house, covered up by concrete and limestone. The police obtained a second search warrant and searched John's home. Although their primary objective was to find the body of Robert Piest, once they started digging, the decomposed remains of the victims slowly started showing themselves. It was a horrifying sight. Bones, teeth, rotting limbs. There was no escape for the killer clown now. He confessed to his murders, but still twisted the details whenever he could by calling his victims liars and prostitutes. At his trial for 33 killings, his lawyers tried to argue he had multiple personalities and was insane, but to no avail. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty and sentenced to death. On May 9, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection. The killer clown of Chicago is still one of the most notorious cases of serial killing known today. Since then, John Wayne Gacy has been the subject of media attention, documentaries, and museum exhibits. Do you know of any other cases like this? Comment below and subscribe for more interesting, bizarre, eventful realities.